Hello, my name is Christopher Andrews, and today I will be talking to you uh, about media bias. Now, the definition of media bias is basically bias, well, obviously, but bias that is shown in things like the news, news articles, news coverage, stories on TV, and on places like TV shows and movies and on social media. Now, I'm doing this as a part of my graduation project. Now, in my graduation project, in my paper, I talked about the different steps that we could take to try to eliminate media bias once and for all. Now, one thing I talked about in my paper was that we need to inform ourselves about what media bias looks like and the different types of media bias and how we can catch them when we see them. So as a part of that, I created a survey on Google Forms so that I could get a sense of what people already knew about media bias. Now, my first question of my survey was, are you aware of the different types of media bias? 78.6 people answered yes. 14.3% of the people that took the survey answered no. And 7.1% of the people that took my survey said maybe. So some different types of media bias and news stories are biased by selection of sources, meaning that some journalists only ask certain people questions based on their credentials, maybe of their skin color, or other determining factors that they use to get sources for their stories. Another type of bias is story selection. It means that they choose which stories they want to cover or not, whether or not they believe that they should be covered or not. So they can pick and choose which topics they think are quote unquote newsworthy rather than just reporting the news as it is. And I would think the most popular type of bias is bias by omission. Bias by omission means that the news people, they leave out certain parts of the story, certain holes that can just change up the whole story, because it's kind of like a water balloon, kind of. If you poke a hole right in a water balloon, it could all just come flooding out, and then you're not gonna know what happened. So with bias by omission, it's like they're poking holes in the story so that parts of it are left out. The parts that they don't want the public to know, the parts that they don't want the public to hear, they're left out of the story. So not everybody knows what actually happened. The last form of bias within the news world is personal bias, or bias by spin. That is when reporters have a certain body language or interpretation of the news that shows that they don't really think that the news is important, and then the viewers can catch on to the viewers can catch on to what the reporters are trying to give off. So if a reporter's body language is like relaxed or nonchalant while they're reporting about something like a robbery or a shooting, the viewers are going to catch on to that, then themselves are going to become nonchalant about this story. And okay, for my second question for my survey, the second question for my survey is, have you noticed a specific group of people being portrayed by stereotypes on TV shows and movies? And 100% of the people that took my survey answered yes, they have seen that. I myself have seen that, which is why I've seen it a lot, which is why I chose this topic for my graduation project. When I was growing up, I used to watch shows like CSI, NCIS, a lot of police shows, and then I started to notice that on these shows, most of the criminals would be people of color. That you would always see the Latino people selling drugs, or the black people shooting up places. And then it was a constant thing over and over again. And I would sit down with my mother while we were watching it together, and I would ask her, how come they're only showing people of color as the criminals? And there's just a lot of stuff. When people watch the media, if people, I don't know what I'm doing. Oh my God. Okay. People would use stereotypes to describe a certain group of people. Like they would use a white, skinny, blonde woman as someone who is dumb and rich. They would use a black person as a person who commits a lot of crimes, who came from a broken home where they lived with their mother or their father, but never both parents. They would use Latino people to portray people who use and sell drugs. They would use Islamic people to show terrorists, and it's just ongoing. They never stop. Stereotypes never stop in media. My third question for my survey was, have you ever noticed an actor or actress to play similar roles in movies and TV shows? And 100% of the people who took my survey answered yes. Now, this is a specific form of media bias called typecasting. Typecasting is when they see one person who did well in one role that they had, and then now the only role that they can get is a similar role as to one that they had received great critics about. One person who is a victim of typecasting would be Emma Roberts. Emma Roberts is usually known to play the blonde, rich, white girl who always gets what she wants, and she's willing to type of person who would step on anybody in their way so that she can get what she wants. Another person who is a victim of typecasting would be Taraji P. Henson. Now, Taraji P. Henson has been in a plethora of movies and TV shows, but in most of them, she has played the black woman with weave. Now I'm gonna edit that part out. I should not say that. Taraji P. Henson usually plays the black woman who always has an attitude, the black woman who you would always see yelling everywhere that she is, who has no sense of personal space and has no sense of what is right and wrong. And another person who has had similar roles like Taraji P. Henson is new and upcomer actress Tiffany Haddish. Now, Tiffany Haddish, she is a comedian turned actress, and most of her acting roles are of the ghetto black woman who's loud and has no... Tiffany Haddish plays roles of the loud black ghetto woman. And I feel like when people play roles that are similar to each other over and over again, they're not really showing their full potential, their full talent. And people are going to start to think that these are the only roles that these people can actually play, because people are going to think that the reason that they keep on playing these roles is because that is the way that these actresses are in real life, which I think is unfair to assume about anybody. My fourth question was, during the 2016 presidential election, whose ads did you see more of? 78.6% of the people who took my survey answered Donald Trump, and 21.4% of people answered Hillary Clinton. Now, I will admit that I did see more Donald Trump commercials, but they were more of Donald Trump bashing commercials. And I saw those on news sites like NBC, ABC News, and not ABC News, just like ABC in general, the whole channel. And I would see more of Hillary Clinton, as the good person, the person who would do no wrong. And I think that that is unfair. I feel like everybody who is in the news world should just, I don't know what I'm doing with my life. So, I feel like it is the news's job to just give out the facts and to not pick sides. I would see more Donald Trump commercials on Fox, the Fox channel, of that portrayed his good sides, that would see him as the good guy. And then they would display Hillary as a snake and someone who cannot be trusted. I feel like it is not it's not TV network's job to try and convince anybody of who they should be voting for. I feel like that is up to people and what they want to research. But when people are watching TV and watching their TV shows, unless they're watching the news, there should be no politics and like commercials and stuff, especially none that purposefully bash another candidate or another person willingly. My next question was, where do you get your news from? From my survey, it looks like most people get their news from CNN. And then going down the list, it would be CNN, Fox News, ABC News, the New York Times, CBS, the Washington Post, and NBC. That was going down the list from top to least, which I think is good because later on in the video, I will be showing you which news stations are more biased than the others. So stay tuned for that. My next question was, do you believe that if an actor plays a certain role well, they should continue to only play similar roles for the rest of their career? And 92.9% of people answered no, and 7.1% of people answered maybe. Now, this question ties into my previous question about typecasting, and I have already explained typecasting and my stance on typecasting, so on to the next question. My next question was, should all news workers be submitted to random checks to make sure that they are presenting the news as it is so that it is not biased? 92.9% of people answered yes, and 7.1% of people answered maybe. I think that while news stories are checked, I don't think that they're very deeply checked, because the one thing that every news story should have is validity. It's validity, not validity, because that doesn't sound right. Validity. Every news story should be true, and it should also be reliable. They shouldn't just give the news out the way that they want it to. They should give it out the way that it is. The way that it comes through. I don't know what I'm saying. So, an example of this was a few months ago when Mac Miller died. Every single news article that I saw about his death, the title of the article was Ariana Grande's ex Mac Miller, or Ariana Grande's ex-boyfriend, or Mac Miller, ex-boyfriend of Ariana Grande. They kept on dragging Ariana Grande into the story of his overdose, or of his death, even though she had nothing to do with it. I don't know what I'm doing. The news articles kept on using Ariana Grande as, I think that they used it as clickbait, so that while Mac Miller would be trending as a trending topic, so would Ariana Grande, so that people would get a rise out of her about his death, Mac Miller's death. My next question was, on a scale of 1 to 10, how bad do you think media bias is where you live? And most people answered on a scale of 1 to 10, 10 being the baddest, in the range of 7 and 8. So that means that most people are aware of the bias and that there's a lot of bias where people live, which is not good. And my last question is, do you believe the media does a good job reporting the news with all the facts? And 71.4% of the people who took my survey answered no. While I do think that there are some facts in every single news story that is given to us, there is a part of it that is not true. There is always going to be a part of it that is made up, whether it be an eyewitness statement or just the article itself, the way that the journalist typed the article, the words that that person used. They use certain words to make people think certain ways about topics. And that is an example of personal bias, and also bias by omission, because people might not believe this, or they might not say that it's true, but people listen to news reporters. They think that if a news reporter or a journalist says that something happened this certain way, they're going to believe that person, whether or not it's true or not. So people always believe people in authority, whether or not they were actually in authority or not. That didn't make any sense, did it? Scratch that. People believe people who are in authority, even when the people who are in authority are wrong, or they don't fact check their information. All news should be fact checked, and all news should be reliable and valid. Now I'm going to show you my diagram of my TV. Not my TV. I'm going to show you my diagram of my artifact from my service learning project. So now that you have seen the artifact, and you have watched this whole video, I hope that you all can check the news a little better. Make sure that the news that you are receiving is valid news, that the news is always fact-checked. I would do background checks on every single person whose article that you read, and I would make sure to stay away from the biased media sites like Fox News and NBC News. you all have the information that I've just given you. Take it how you will. And I'm going to go because this was very uncomfortable for myself. So, have a nice day, afternoon, night. Please like this video and leave a comment. And yeah, that's all. Okay, goodbye. For my service learning project, a part of my job was to inform the public about the issue that I stated in my graduation paper. So I decided to make a replica of a TV so I could display which news sites favored one side of the story over another. Now, I split the TV down the middle and I represented both sides of the story. The left side represents the liberal view and the right side represents the conservative view. Some news sites that prefer the liberal view of things is MSNBC and the Huffington Post. Some news sites that prefer the conservative view is Fox News Channel and the Daily Caller. Now, I also decided to add 3 news sites that do not particularly favor one side over the other, and they are neutral while giving the news. And those 3 sites are CNN, ABC News, and BBC News. Now, I decided to make this so I could display in a physical way of how some news sites favor one view over the other. And I decided to make a TV because the most popular form of media bias is within the news on TV. It is very important to research which news sites you should want to listen to and which news sites you would want to look for the most accurate story, so that you will not go to a news site that is biased towards one side of the story. The thing about the news is that it should all be the same. There should be no variations between the news of the same story on either site. It should all be the same news. So the sites that I recommend that you not listen to, the news sites that I recommend you watch out for, that you should take your news from, would be CNN, ABC News, and BBC News, so that you can make sure that you are getting the most accurate version of the news that you are looking for.